so much. My name is Chisom Mbama. Come on, please, next slide. Nice. And what's happening?
Next slide.
We're talking about what you can do with dbt. But just so that I don't make assumptions about the fact that we all know what dbt is. If you used dbt before, can I see your hands? If you've heard of dbt before, can I see your hands? Heard of dbt. If you've not heard of dbt and you've not worked with dbt before, can I see your hands? Stop it now. Okay, but yeah, I see a couple of people. So before we move into all we have for today, I'll do just a very brief overview of dbt, and then I'll talk about one specific feature about dbt. Next slide. Yeah. So interestingly, maybe we are the introduction slide. So interestingly, one thing I don't know if most people know is that I transitioned from a career in nursing and midwifery to a career in data. So a fun fact would have been that I'm a retired nurse. And so one thing I always noticed when I came to meetups, just starting into this space, was that people would just come and they'll say really technical things, and I'll be wondering what's happening here. Just like, they just say really, really tough things, and I'll just, how we are in a meetup and you're just sitting down, but you're really not understanding what's going on because the words you're hearing, right? And so every time I have the opportunity to speak at meetups, I try to simplify the process as much as possible. And one more tip to know as we go through all of these trainings, if you hear a word or something that is constantly being repeated that we don't know what it means, just write it down and do a brief research on it. And as you do that, you begin to build your knowledge on different things, and then you kind of become vast. It's a constant learning process. Okay. So let's talk about dbt. So dbt is an acronym for Data Build Tool, right? So dbt is an acronym for Data Build Tool. What's the full meaning of CTE? Anybody? Okay, amazing. Because I remember he was saying it, and I was looking at somebody's head. I was like, what's CTE? So I thought I would ask. So dbt is an acronym for Data Build Tool. It's a tool that allows you work in the transform part of your data logic. So we have what we call ETL. When you're handling data, so you extract your data from a source, first off, and then you load the data into your warehouse, and then you transform the data. You kind of like model it based on business logics, just to shape it to look like what you want it to do. Right, so dbt is that tool that allows you to write those your transformation logics. And the interesting thing about dbt is that you're not just writing transformations with languages you don't know. You're writing your transformation logics with SQL queries. So how many people can write SQL? That's like from the people who don't actually even know how to use dbt or who have not used dbt yet, but you know how to write SQL. Can I see your hands? Yeah, interesting. So that's the interesting thing about dbt. So SQL is a pretty much very accessible language, and so you can write those transformations of your data using SQL queries. And so that's just like one very major interesting thing about dbt. So dbt makes it accessible for people like us who know SQL but not maybe core programming languages to still be able to transform or model our data. So what are we even using dbt to start with? Apart from the fact that you would model or transform your data very quickly and easily, it allows you to incorporate some best practices, some software engineering best practices like version control. Version control is like, what's version control? Who wants to say something about version control? Anybody? What's version control? Like that. So I don't want to assume that you know anything. That's why I'm just asking. Okay, so with a tool like dbt, you're not just transforming your data logic, but you can do things like testing, version control, and like so many interesting things. But we're going to be talking about one major one, which is documentation. So we're just going to drill more into documentation. And my goal for this talk is just to make a case for dbt so that you would consider actually learning how to use the tool if you don't know how to use it, because it has so much value. And if it's something that and it's also something you can recommend for your organization if you feel like this can be very helpful for you. So I'm going to talk about how dbt does documentation. But before we go to how dbt does documentation, what's documentation? When you hear the word documentation, what comes to mind? It's just basically capturing and recording important information about system, processes, or data in a very structured and organized manner. So there was this thing that usually happened when, for example, if you work in a consulting firm, like where I work, you are onboarded to a client and then you are exposed to the client's database. So they have like tables and everything, and now you need to start working on this particular data or like helping them to solve problems. But then you see things like tables that you don't even understand what they do. You don't know how they define certain things. So you have a table that has your columns and everything, but you don't know what does this column mean? What does revenue mean in their context and all of that, right? And documentation, ideally, there should be like a place where you can go to and you can see all this information. And so you don't necessarily have to always meet an individual to say, hey, I'm trying to work on this thing. What's the meaning of this column? What does this particular thing mean? We can have a place where we can have all of those information well documented. Next slide. So why should we document? First off, why is documentation even important? One thing that I've gotten to understand about documentation is that beyond the context of data claims and data, documentation is something that is important like in life generally. You just really need to be able to, for example, if you buy a washing machine and you don't know how to operate it, it comes with like a manual where you see everything that you need to do to actually install, turn it on and stuff like that. So documentation is very important. So when we're talking about documentation in the context of data and how dbt actually does documentation for us, I want you to think about documentation from a very holistic point of view. You want to be able to give information to anybody who's using this for the very first time, or if you notice something, you want to document it so that anybody who comes across it does not have to go through that anymore. Okay, so why do we document? So first one would be, let's click next. Okay, yeah. So the first one is for shared understanding of the data processes and tools in data-related projects. I had this interesting use case where I worked with a client and it was like a particular data team, right? It was a business. They had like a data team, but there was one individual, there was one guy that had worked in the company for a very long time. And so if you wanted to ask any question about the data, it's always like, please reach out to him. Please reach out. It didn't just make sense. What if he's on leave? What if he falls ill? We'll not be able to do anything because we don't understand it. So there has to be like a shared understanding of everything so that even if somebody is not present, things can still move forward. Okay, so that's one very good importance of documentation. We also document to ensure definitions and processes are consistent, accurate, and repeatable, right? He said one interesting thing when he was talking about SQL. He said that you could see like two tables now, and you see customer ID there in table 1 and customer ID in table 2, and you just assume that you want to join on customer IDs on both tables, just because it's named customer ID. But when we document, actually, we will not make assumptions. If we are joining on two things or whatever, we will know that, yeah, these two things can actually be joined. Also for collaboration, knowledge sharing, prevention of duplicated work, next one. Compliance and regulation, next one. And to ultimately reduce the risk of data errors or data loss. Now, when it comes to documentation, there are different things you can document. You can document processes. For example, how do you go about creating this? Or how do you go about deploying this? You can document a process. You can document information about a particular database. You can document anything. Documentations can actually be anything. Anything that just makes people's life easy. Anything that democratizes knowledge and brings it to a central place where everybody can actually see. Okay, so that's why we document. So let's go back to dbt. So how does dbt handle documentation? The first one, there are actually a couple of ways or many options that dbt gives us to document. The first one is descriptions in YML files. So if you have not used dbt before, dbt usually would come with SQL files, YAML files, and that just contains your project, like your project packages. So there's one of these files that is a YML file. When I say a file is a YML file, it means that the extension of the file, by the time you create the file, you save it as a .yml file, right? So basically, you can actually have descriptions within, click on the next. Okay, you can actually have descriptions within your YML file. So just take a look at this. We have a model, right? And this model is named something, and then there is a description of what this model is doing. So let's say I didn't even build this project, I didn't work on it, but somehow, I have to contribute to it. I can take a look at this thing, right, and actually understand what it does. I can document column name descriptions. Now, the more interesting thing about descriptions in YML files is that there are different types of descriptions you can put here. For example, you can embed an image into the YML descriptions in YAML files of dbt. You can put like a markdown file. You can put like a link to another model. So there are different things you can put in this place. And it's not just limited to documenting like your models or your columns. You can also describe things like, gingers, macros, reusable codes, that everybody kind of has a shared understanding of what is being done. But the important thing they are saying here is that somebody can actually come to a place, right? Come to a particular code base and look through it and basically have an understanding of what's going on here and so be able to contribute. Does that make sense? Okay. Next slide. So we're still talking about how dbt handles documentation, yeah? And we talked about descriptions in YAML file. One other thing is that we have what we call a DAG. A DAG is an acronym for Directed Acyclic Graph. And you can literally just see the visual relationship between your models. So you can open a code base that just looks so, it can have like multiple tables and so many things, but you can just have something like a lineage graph that shows you the relationship between them, and it just makes your life really easy. And this concept of that is something that, to digress a bit, something that I think most even BI tools are adopting. For example, if you use BI tools like Sigma, they have things like DAG where you can look through and just see like how are these tables related, how did we get to this point, where is the source, where is all of this, and just makes everybody's life very easy. So we have the DAG, next slide, and we also have auto-generated documentation. So you know how we had descriptions in YAML files, yeah? After all these descriptions are put in the YAML file of your dbt project, you can actually create a website where somebody can just come and look through that website and see all the information about this particular project. How awesome is that? Just click on like next. So dbt basically generates documentation for your dbt project and data warehouse and renders it as a website. Okay, so it's like a static website, and you can choose to host it in different ways. You can host it on dbt Cloud. You can also host it on things like Netlify. You can, just different things. You can host it on Amazon S3, if I'm not mistaken. So like you can literally have like this, you can literally like, somebody can just come here and look at something that has been generated and understand what this project is about. Like, oh, these are the details of it, this is the description and everything based on what you put in your YAML file. And so how does dbt actually generate this? I don't want to talk about the intricacies, but just with two different commands, dbt doc generated and dbt doc serve, you run these commands and you have this automatically generated for you with information that you have put in. And even if you didn't even put in certain information, it can extract, it just has this intelligence to extract certain things and just add it to that. So it's really an amazing tool. Next slide. In conclusion, dbt is actually a very powerful tool. It makes your life easy. There's this use case I'm currently working on at work where we have this client that uses a business intelligence tool that's called Looker. So think of Tableau, Power BI, all those things. Looker is a business intelligence tool where you can basically, do all you need to do. Now, interestingly, this client had extracted their data from a source. put it in a warehouse, and they were modeling data in Looker. So instead of having like an intermediate place like dbt where they do all the transformation and modeling, we were modeling it in the BI tool. So you guys are familiar with Power BI, yeah? Familiar with Power BI. You know how you can model your data in Power BI? Yeah, so imagine they were doing really, really heavy modeling in Looker, and for them to load one visualization, it could literally take minutes, 10 minutes to load one visualization. And so what we're currently doing for them is that we're taking all of those logic in Looker and putting it in dbt. And it's something we are still working on, but we're just excited for the speed with which they will be able to load certain things because of how easy and powerful dbt is going to make their life. So dbt is a powerful tool. With dbt, data teams can easily document their data models, add metadata, auto-generate documentation, visualize data lineage, and do so many amazing things. As I go, one thing to just add to this is that even if you don't necessarily, maybe as a person in your learning journey, you don't necessarily have a reason to use dbt now, I think you could just start learning it if you could. There are very good resources on dbt side. I think there are almost like 4 tutorials now where you can just start and just continue learning. Before I joined Brooklyn Data, I had no reason to use dbt because the companies I was working with were not using it, but I just really heard so much about it and I started learning to use it, and now I currently use it almost every day at work because I just started learning it. So one goal, something to take out from all this meetup is to actually add that to one of the things that just go through the whole trainings and just learn it. It could add to your skill set because it's such a valuable tool that is very valuable across teams. And so, yeah, that's the end. Any questions? Don't ask me hard questions.
First of all, dbt is it open source?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So most companies would want like data security. So how do we handle that?
Okay. That's a really good question. So she said dbt is open source. So how do you handle security with dbt? So when I say dbt is open source because anybody can actually contribute to the development of the tool, not like access to your data. Do you understand? So there are different features of dbt. It is open source because you can look at something and say, it would be nice to have this thing, it would be nice to improve on this particular thing, and then contribute to the development of the tool. Or maybe you want to improve on the documentation. Oh, based on my use of dbt, I noticed that we can improve the documentation in such and such a way. But the whole security that comes with using the tool is a different ballgame entirely. That does not, the fact that it's open source does not influence that. Does that make sense?
Can I speak on security?
Yeah, okay.
So more on security, right? Each company has what they call like a dbt cloud account. So the dbt cloud account has its own credentials, not accessible to public, right? So you have your own credentials. And then even in that dbt cloud account, it is advisable for not to have all your developers, people who are working on dbt, to have access to that dbt cloud account. What you can then have is a dbt CLI account, which is like your own local machine, your own computer. And for you to be able to log into, like to develop and push to that cloud account, you should have a profiles.yaml file, like it's a profile page specific to you. Whether it is your username and your password in those profiles, like that's where your username and your password is stored. And so dbt, using your local machine, gets access with your username and password stored on your local machine in your profiles.yaml file. And then you can now make changes to the dbt cloud environment. to dbt cloud environment. And with your profiles.yaml file as well, I was going to say something and I totally forgot. But let me shut up now. When you get the gist. All right.
Yeah, let me just ask that as well. So also dbt doesn't store any data, right? It treats your data as code. So it doesn't store any of your data. So it has to be afraid of security. So for us in the bank, everybody has dbt on their system based on their own profiles, like you mentioned, and then they push to the repo. And that repo is within our Azure environment, so an external person cannot come in there. So if there's a breach, it's from human beings. So
Please. Okay.
My first question is a follow-up to like I think there's a degree from my understanding of the question, dbt is an open source tool, right? Okay, dbt is an open source tool, right? So there's contribution from the open source community and stuff. Now, I don't know if you guys are in the early days of blogging and stuff like that, that you do blog stuff. You can load a theme from a particular developer and use it in your blog. There's usually a watermark at the bottom, like this thing was done by so and so. If you try and remove that watermark, what happens is that your page, anybody that goes to your page, will be directed to the developer's page, and you will not be able to stop it. But if you want to stop, there are a lot of JavaScript code that are going to go. Now, in open source, to this kind of thing, you can contribute a particular kernel or some particular module to a particular code. I can infuse whatever I want to infuse. So it's not a matter of securing with password, with CLI, with profile. It's about the main software itself. Like, how do they secure their software? Like, how do they, what are the things that people can contribute to? What part of it is open source? I think that's what I'm interested in. Not how each company is going to secure their data. I mean, dbt itself as a software, like that people are contributing to. How do they secure what people are contributing to? Okay, this thing does not cause any vulnerabilities.
You might help.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. Yeah. So from the data perspective, right, which is the question relating to security, most of the tools, I would say all of the tools as much as possible, will comply to GDPR and a lot of all these data privacy.